Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg. I'm the publisher of Orbis books, and I'm very glad to be joined today by one of our new authors, Tizon, who is the author of this new book, Christ Among the Classes, the Rich, the Poor, and the Mission of the Church. Al is the former president of the American Society of Missiology. He received a PhD from the Graduate Theological Seminary in Berkeley. He's an affiliate professor of missional and global leadership at North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago and lead pastor of Grace Fellowship Community Church in San Francisco. This is a very challenging book, I have to say, written especially for, I guess you would say, non-poor Christians in North America or elsewhere, that raises very deep questions about the authenticity of our faith in relation to the gap between the rich and the poor. In the first part, you outline a picture of Christ among the classes, as you say, his own life growing up in the poor peasant class, his active life that was largely spent among the poor, his message of good news to the poor, and his challenge to wealth and privilege. And then in the second part of the book, you raise questions about the extent to which the church mirrors this picture of Christ among the classes. And you provide a sequence of steps by which the church or Christians can take an inventory of their relationship to classism and undergo a process of conversion to justice and solidarity. I hope I got that pretty much right. Let me so welcome you here and first ask you to explain that concept of classism, which plays such an important role in the book.
You know, classism, as I think about Miguel de la Torre's metaphor of the three-prong, the devil's pitchfork, the three prongs of the devil's pitchfork, which is sexism, racism, and classism. I see classism as the prong that is most deeply embedded in the flesh of the world. It's mostly unseen because it's so deeply embedded, but it's doing great damage. And in terms of its definition, it's basically the fact, you know what? I'm just going to read it.
Please.
If that's right. Classism, I don't like to quote myself usually, but here it is. I define classism as collective prejudice formed into a system of inequality based on socioeconomic stratification, undergirded by embedded cultural narratives concerning the poor, and then instituted by the powers that be at the expense of the poor. And it's basically looking at the poor among us as less than. And the difference between classism and, say, racism and sexism is that the basis of our prejudice against them is this underlying assumption that it's their own fault that they're poor.
Mm-hmm.
Racism, for example, based on the pigmentation of skin, it's not their fault, and their prejudice is based on the color itself. Same with sexism; it's based on one's gender. But in classism, the prejudice is based on, well, you could have become a lot more than you are. It's your fault, not taking into account the structural nature of poverty. So yeah, that's what I'm challenging in this book.
It's difficult for the non-poor to see because, again, of that idea that somehow you don't see that you're enjoying privileges. You feel somehow you earned this, you were born into it, or God has blessed you in some special way that has been withheld from the poor. They are unlucky, it's their fate, whatever. One of
Right.
the things I was taken by is that you describe your own kind of process of conversion or waking up to this reality. You called it
Yeah.
a born again experience. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yes. In fact, I would consider this book as uh, my articulation of my own conversion, right,
Mm,
to a justice-oriented life, and that conversion continues. But for me, it was uh, a visceral experience being in the Philippines, my homeland. I grew up here in the United States, but then went back to the Philippines as an adult missionary and worked among the poorest of the poor in the squatter communities of Metro Manila, and then later on in a disaster-stricken province. It was in the first squatter community that was assigned to me, that I befriended, I learned to befriend all kinds of beautiful people in that community. There was this 8-year-old uh, little girl who was sharing with me her own take on Christmas. It was during the Christmas holidays. And
mm,
this is the way really I began the book, just um, it was my own waking up uh, experience when this little girl, Jocelyn, is what I named her in the book. It's not a real name, but when Jocelyn began to insist that Christmas was for the rich because we're celebrating all this, and we can't, we, the poor, she, a poor girl, wasn't participating, couldn't participate because she didn't have any money. And we actually argued, and she won,
mm.
that Christmas, the way it has developed and morphed, is really better experienced if you have money to and buy gifts to exchange, etc. Go to the mall, and which she couldn't do. And that has just stuck with me. And I don't know how other authors begin to write books, but for me, I write a book basically in my head for years, and then finally, when I can't stand it anymore, I start writing things down. Um, and that's what that experience did for me. It just stayed with me. It lingered, and I began to say, wow, there are forces, there are structures that prevent little girls like Jocelyn to live into her fullness, even as she is situated on near the bottom of the social class.
Mm,
So yeah, it's my conversion. It was my born again experience back into the world of poverty and suffering and oppression. And then I discovered Jesus there. That's where Jesus resides. Oh, okay, yeah.
mm, mm,
And so the slow lifelong process of conversion for me was to take the steps that I needed to join Jesus
mm,
below.
mm. I in the first part of the book, you kind of read back into the story of Jesus in his context and relation to the classes of his time, and it
Yeah.
is really striking. Of course, there are verses that pop to our minds: "Blessed are the poor," and his how easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man
Yeah.
to get into heaven, that sort of thing. You see this as a kind of really as a defining theme of the gospel, and there were a couple of passages that really jumped out at me. In particular, for instance, the reflection on the parable about Dives and Lazarus. Uh,
Yes.
could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, I can. It's just I don't know where to begin because
Yeah.
Jesus, he was all about that, right? I mean, his whole life from his birth to his teachings to his his ministry among the sick and the leprous and the outcasts, and his criticism toward those who got rich at the expense of peasantry. He was all about them, and I think we forget that we have
Mhm.
successfully put Jesus in the middle class, domesticated him, and and then we live our lives accordingly, as if God is sanctifying our own middle class life, etc. And which is why I wanted to paint a portrait again of Jesus among the classes. How did Jesus live among and interact with and be poor himself?
Mm.
That's why it was important for me to begin at his birth,
Yeah.
which,
Mhm.
it was a humble birth, right? We just celebrated it. And it, it was a humble birth and a humble beginning living in a rural town of Nazareth, and he and his family suffered the same hardships that all the peasant subjects of the Roman Empire experienced. And then, we, of course, that gap between his 10th year and his 30th year when he began his public ministry, we can only imagine um, that he continued in that vein. He continued to be poor. There's no indication that he, made it somewhere, but he began to preach and teach, and um, he taught more about wealth and poverty than any other subject. If we interpret a lot of his parables of the kingdom in socioeconomic terms, which is not hard, it's not a stretch,
Yeah.
So he was all about that, and I think every generation needs to be reminded of that, so that the church can become uh, consistent with who it claims to follow,
Mm.
which is part two of the book, right? It's church among the classes. How can we best reflect uh, of Jesus among the classes?
I'll just list the those steps that you provide in part two. Um, Awakening to compassion, and I want to get back to that in a second. From self-gain to generosity, from accumulation to simplicity, from proprietary rights to hospitality, from savior complex to friendship, and from safety to solidarity. Um, why don't you begin just at the beginning there with the
Yeah,
awakening to compassion and how that's
yeah,
a
yeah,
first step along the way?
and right, and I'll begin by saying that that's a descent.
Yes, please explain.
Those
You
steps or
call it a
movements.
downward journey, and you should
It's a
explain a little bit what
downward
you mean
journey.
by that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like classism is a cloudy existence. That is,
Uh-huh.
we're up in the clouds, and we're enjoying life, and we think it's secure, but really we're just standing on clouds, and it's that fragile. Um, and the descent, the way to get to Jesus is to go downward, not upward. It's to come down from the clouds step by step or movement by movement to join Jesus where Jesus is, among the poor, among the oppressed, in the valley, if you will. And so that first step is an awakening. And again, these steps or movements are reflections of my own conversion, right? So it began with an awakening for me. I even describe a little bit of the Matrix for
Yeah.
those who
Yeah.
are sci-fi fans. One of my favorite movies. but it was that violent for me, was that dramatic, that my eyes opened once again, which is again why Born Again works for me. It was as if, you know, something came off and I began to see at least a glimpse. I caught a glimpse of how God sees the world,
Mm.
and it's scary.
Mm.
It's really scary, and it's scary because um, where Jesus is, I wasn't. I was off doing something uh, that was taught to me.
Mm.
I was really trying to make it. That upward mobility, that kind of life of trying to self better, to better oneself. Um, and it was an awakening to the tragedy of that for me, but also an awakening to compassion. It was a wow, wow. I need to spend my time not primarily to better myself, but to be where Jesus is, as he betters those who are truly suffering in the world.
Mm.
And so it was an awakening to compassion,
Mm.
ultimately.
Mm. Which is just the first step along the way. At the
It's
end of
just
the
the
book,
first.
you have a kind of an appendix, which is a an inventory of how to kind
Yeah,
of take stock of your own kind of progress along this, or openness to this path, and it is very challenging. You know, the first, kind of questions about you know, when you come across a channel about hunger or needy children, what do you do? When you see a person begging on the street, what's your response to that? And at the end, you
yeah,
can score these things, 0 to 6 points. The idea of showing compassion for the poor may be new to you, and you
yeah.
go through each of these steps. I didn't take the whole test. I was a little nervous about that myself. Uh, the the I think of the you talk about simplicity too, and moving
Yeah,
away from this view where we define ourselves. Our identity is so wrapped up in what we have,
right.
that it creates a kind of filter or a screen that makes it impossible even for us to see our neighbors, much less to recognize Christ in them.
Yeah, and that's that second movement, right? It's actually that's the third movement. The second movement, if I can, it's uh
self
accumulation to generosity, is
self
it?
gain to generosity is what you have
There it
there.
is, there it is. Yeah, which to me is the other side of the coin of awakening to compassion.
Mhm.
So the waking up experience is not just seeing the needs in the world, but also seeing how you weren't attending to those needs. I wasn't attending to those needs. I was attending to something else, namely myself. And like you said, it's our very identity that is at stake. Um, we're taught from the ground up, that life is about uh, upward mobility. It's about making oneself comfortable and secure. And and I'm not against all those things,
Mhm.
but when that's our primary motivation for life, then that's when I believe we cross the line to a kind of classism that goes along with that ambition.
Mhm.
And so the waking up was also waking up to, okay, I'm I need to change. And there's this impulse. What I have, I'm gonna give away. I'm
Mhm.
just gonna, I'm gonna I need to give it away to those who need it. I don't need all this. And so I talk about generosity as lavish giving, but eventually tempered by uh, a a mature stewardship that doesn't just
Mhm.
give money, because that's not going to ultimately help anybody.
Mhm.
So it's a generosity that is tempered by stewardship. We have to ask the right questions and be good stewards with the resources that have been given us. But that's not the way it starts. The
Mhm.
This movement is again a waking up, and waking up to the resources that I have, and then couple that with the needs that you have just recently awakened to also, and you just wanna here, give it. I don't want to take it away from me. Give it to the poor. Um, that eventually has to mature into a life of stewardship of the resources God has entrusted us with.
Well, there is that very direct challenge with the rich young man who approaches Jesus, looking for the
Mhm.
secret of eternal life or whatever, and Jesus looks at him with love and said, well, then if you want to be perfect, uh, give away what you have, sell what you have, give to the poor, and come follow me. Uh,
Yeah.
and we know, as he walks away sadly, and that's when we learn that he's actually a very wealthy person, and not exactly, that's not really the answer he was looking for.
That's right. That's right. I don't know about you, Robert, but for me, sometimes I wish the Bible stories like that would continue. Like
Yeah,
I wanted to follow this rich young
mm,
ruler to see how it did him, it impacted him.
yeah.
Did he finally come to terms with what Jesus said to him?
I
I
think a
would
lot of times
love
in
to.
our lives, it's maybe it's not so much no as not yet, not ready for that, right?
Yeah,
Make that decision on the spot, But
right.
yeah, it'd be
Exactly.
nice to know what happened next. Maybe what happens next is what happens with us, as we read that story. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
seeds that it plants in us. Uh,
Right. Right.
I was thinking very much in reading your book how much it resonated with what was the important experience in my early life was working with Dorothy Day at the Catholic Worker. And
Mm.
she took very literally into heart these kinds of ideas that our salvation depends on the works of mercy, insofar as you I was hungry and you fed me, insofar as you did this to the least of my brothers and sisters, you did it directly to me. So that came out of that. And then that led also directly, not just to the works of mercy, but to her life of voluntary poverty in her case, which was
Yeah.
really living among the poor with sharing that experience of insecurity. Because as I said, she felt you couldn't really even see your neighbor as long as you had felt you had this thing you had to kind of protect. And it's very sort of Franciscan kind of experience too, where he
Yeah.
he kind of turned all the values of his time upside down uh, after kissing a leper,
Yeah.
and begins to read the gospel from the perspective of the poor, and it opens up not just an understanding of the gospel, but a whole different understanding of what it means to be a Christian.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And that voluntary poverty that Dorothy Day um, uh, vowed, it's so important. It's such an important movement, toward simplicity is how I
Mhm,
worded it
mhm,
in the
mhm,
book. An accumulation from accumulation to simplicity. It's important because I I personally know uh, several wealthy people who give generously, but it
mhm,
it doesn't really change their own lives,
mhm,
and it feels incomplete to me. Um, and I think that generosity has to somehow um, impact our own way of life. Our lives need to reflect our concern for the poor.
mhm,
So it's just giving away surplus
mhm,
as it is. All right, how can my life bear witness to genuine concern for poor? And it's certainly not you know, a house full of what do we call them? Luxuries,
Mhm.
and having excesses and just extravagance. I'm not sure that reflects our concern for the poor, and so our very lifestyles need to reflect this
Mhm.
movement toward where Jesus resides.
Well, I thought one of the really, again, challenging steps, they're all challenging, but when you talk about moving from the savior complex to friendship, so,
Yeah,
it's a matter of actual relationship with poor people
yeah,
and how that
yeah,
calls you to change, uh, to,
yeah. When we start seeing them as people,
yeah.
not projects, right? Because yeah, and if friendships don't develop across classes, then the relationship between the rich and the poor never graduates from a project. You know, we non-poor folk, we can help you, and here's how, and here's our one, two, threes, um, and it has to go beyond that if we're going to reflect Christ among the classes.
Mhm.
Jesus wasn't about projects; he was about people,
Mhm.
and he befriended those on the margins, and I think there's an inherent call there for us to do the same.
Yeah, again, that parable of the rich man and Lazarus, he gives actual name to Lazarus, the poor man. Didn't just say there's a poor man at the gate, there's this man named Lazarus. And the rich
Right.
man had no recognition of him, wasn't friends with him, he didn't even see him, except then when they
Right.
find themselves in their respective fates. And he's still sort of thinking, well, send Lazarus to, bring me some water or something like that. And
Mhm.
there's this implication that the lack of relationship between them, or the kind of relationship they had in life, is going to mirror, reflect in some inverse way their kind of eternal life. Um, um, then you get to from safety to solidarity.
Yeah.
Say a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. I mean, when the poor among us are become our friends, and vice versa, um, it's really hard to watch them suffer from a distance.
Mhm.
In fact, it's impossible. If they're truly friends, then their plight is your plight.
Mhm.
And um, if we watch from a distance, they're not friends. They're not real friends. And this what I've described as safety is that distance. It's like
Mhm.
it's like I I care about you, but I'm not going to sacrifice the security and comfort that I've worked hard for.
Pay a
I'm
price.
going to stay.
You know.
Yeah. So so we have to move away from that and practice solidarity among
Mhm.
and with and for our friends.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean my model for that is Father Ben Beltran. If you
Mhm.
know Father Ben in the
Published
Philippines.
published his book. Yes.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yes. Well, he's forever a picture to me of solidarity among the poor, as he spent 30 years among the scavengers of the infamous Smoky Mountain. And I look to him and go, wow, that's solidarity.
Mhm.
And we have to move toward that.
Mhm.
One thing I want to point out is that these six movements, it's really they're just one
Yeah,
movement.
wonderful.
You know, I describe it as one plus one plus one plus one plus one
Mhm.
plus one equals
Yeah.
one, right?
Yeah.
It's one movement, but it's helpful to me to see the sub movements, if you will, that define the single movement toward justice. Because I can work on these. I mean, when somebody tells me, "Hey, you know, uh, be a person of justice," it's just too big. It's too big for somebody to go, okay, great, I'll let me do that. These 6 steps or 6 movements help me anyway to see them as doable. They're bite-sized, if you will. And if in my life, at a certain point in my life, I'm doing great on compassion, but simplicity, wow, I need to think about that, and so, and that's where the idea of an inventory came about. Was, all right, is there a way we can quantify this and measure it so that as we assess our lives at any given point, where are we strong right now? Where are we practicing justice, and where are we not? And together, if we do all of these together, well, we are reflecting Christ among the classes. To the extent that we need to work on it, work on one of the movements, then that's where we put our energies, and toward this picture of Christ among the classes. So I tried to make it practical and doable, because yeah, it's hard to hear that we are the rich the Bible talks about. It's hard to hear that and not give the readers a way to change that. Um, and I really, I really believe in the Spirit. We can move toward this, even though it's a lifelong process.
Well, I think that process might begin for a lot of people by reading this book. I hope so. There will be others who will look at it and will, like the rich young man in the gospel, walk sadly away, maybe, or at least not yet ready to take
Right.
the whole inventory or read the whole book. But I really want to thank you for a book that made me think and challenged me a lot, and I hope it will for other readers too. So again, the book is
Well,
called Christ Among the Classes, the Rich, the Poor, and the Mission of the Church. I'm sorry, did you want to say something else?
I just wanted to thank Orbis for taking a chance on me. This is a message that I know is hard to swallow. It's a challenge even for me, and I do want to make that clear that uh, that this is as much a challenge to me as it is to any reader. And part of the reason I wrote it was to keep myself accountable to this descent toward justice. And I'm just thankful that Orbis saw fit to get it out there in the world. So, Robert, thank you very much.
What wasn't a big challenge for us. This is really the kind of message that was the foundation of Orbis back in 1970, when we were founded by Mary Knoll, to kind of amplify voices from the margins and a way to evangelize the North American Christians through the voices of the poor. So this book is very much in that tradition. I'm really glad we published it. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Great. Thank you,
All right.
Robert.
Thank you.